We're all shopping for essentials online these days, and now you can get rewarded for it. With the Bank of America Customized Cash Rewards credit card, you can choose to earn 3% cash back on online shopping. The essentials have never felt more rewarding. Visit bankofamerica.com/more rewarding to apply now. Copyright 2021, Bank of America Corporation.
Hello and welcome to Little Gold Men, the award season podcast from Vanity Fair.
It's such an honor to present this next award.
And here are the nominees.
And the Oscar goes to...
And the Oscar goes to...
And I can't deny the fact that you like me. Right now, you like me.
I'm the king of the world.
There's a mistake. Moonlight, you guys won Best Picture.
I'm Katie Rich, and I'm here with a lot of people because it's festival season and a lot of people are seeing a lot of movies. I'm here, as usual, with Richard Lawson. Hi, Richard.
Hello.
And then joining us from the mountains of Telluride, Rebecca Ford. Hi. And David Canfield.
Hello.
And then from the Venice of the heart and mind, Cassie DaCosta.
Hi.
You guys have seen a lot of movies in the last week. I have seen a small handful of them, but we've had the Venice Film Festival, the Telluride Film Festival, and then coming right up is the Toronto Film Festival. Richard, you are currently speaking to us with a view of the CN Tower, which seems contrived, but we planned it that way for this audio-only medium. It really, you feel the impact. So I want to just talk to you guys about what you saw. It's kind of, we did that thing every year where we go from wondering about all these movies and not knowing what the buzz is going to be. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, everyone knows this about Power of the Dog. And it happens in like 24 hours. And suddenly all these narratives are in play. And it's been really exciting because people seem really, really into a lot of these movies. And I want to start with Venice because it started first. We were getting buzz about movies like The Card Counter and The Lost Daughter and Spencer and Dune before Telluride kicked off. And Cassie, you were a designated Venice correspondent. You were not there in person, but you were able to see a lot of the stuff. What stood out for you the most out of all of these like super early titles that Venice got to see first?
I liked a lot of what I saw. I liked The Lost Daughter, I think, was probably the biggest standout for me. I just thought it was a really forceful directorial debut by Maggie Gyllenhaal. And that's hard to do in your first film, especially when it's going to a big studio like Netflix and there's a lot of expectations riding on you. But it was, she truly did her own thing and really took risks with the source material, which is the novel by Elena Ferrante of the same name. And I just felt that was probably the most remarkable thing I saw. I also loved The Card Counter and I enjoyed Spencer as well.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about The Card Counter because it was only at Venice. I think is it going to be at Toronto as well? I know it wasn't at Telluride, and it's coming out in theaters.
It had a secret Telluride screening.
Ooh, that's a show of faith. And it's coming out in like a week. And I think in terms of like sheer cynical Oscar buzz, like it might not be the most important title to talk about, but of course, Oscar Isaac was everywhere for his 45-second slow-mo clip on the red carpet with Jessica Chastain, which is not what The Card Counter is about. But he does have some good scenes with Tiffany Haddish in The Card Counter, so maybe we should not count it out for that. But that's one that people can actually see soon. So Cassie, can you talk about what struck you about that one?
Yeah, I mean, the film itself is not about necessarily the dynamic between Tiffany Haddish and Oscar Isaac, though it is certainly a driving force, emotional force for the film. And while I think the scenes from A Marriage, Jessica Chastain, Oscar Isaac chemistry is now getting a lot of press, I think The Card Counter chemistry is really what people are going to feel when they actually see these films and projects. But the film itself, similar to First Reform, it deals with a kind of major American moral and systemic failure. In this case, it's the abuses at Abu Ghraib. And Oscar Isaac plays a former soldier who goes by William Tell, who was convicted of his crimes there. But the film is also about how, and this is true, this was actually true, many of the people who were actually in charge of sort of orchestrating these abusive practices were never held accountable. It was mostly the people who could be identified in photos, who were often lower ranking soldiers. And in fact, contractors, there are a lot of contract military personnel hired. They actually can't be prosecuted or indicted for those crimes because they were contractors. So the film gets into into that, but not in a technical sense, in a very emotional, moral sense. And that really comes from Paul Schrader's background as growing up in a Calvinist family, really strict Christianity, but also having himself a kind of rebellious counterview to some of that religious doctrine. So this film, I would say, is a lot more hopeful than First Reformed.
It's such a bummer too, though. It's so dark.
It's very dark, but I think it's dark in a way that maybe only somebody who grew up in deep Christianity can access in order to get to the light. You know, like you need the darkness to get to the salvation. So
I'm thinking of my friend who is an ordained minister who saw First Reformed and was so frustrated by it. I'm going to have to get her to see this one and tell me how to read it now. Okay. Wait, did anyone else see Card Counter at Telluride or elsewhere?
I've seen it. Yeah, I really liked it.
It's really interesting vehicle for Oscar Isaac, I think. Like, I think even that the movie, like, kind of, like, worked and didn't work for me in starts, but, like, Oscar Isaac is so magnetic in the whole center of it. And, like, Scenes from a Marriage, that GIF on the red carpet, Dune, and then this, like, it's a really interesting set of work he's doing. And it's, like, kind of unclear if, like, this is the year he finally gets an Oscar nomination, which I think we've all been waiting for. But, like, it does seem to all be building toward that and, like, showing just more and more of what he can do.
I think if you have 3 projects at Venice in 1 year, they just give you a villa on the Grand Canal. I think that's how that works.
I would accept that consolation prize for not having an Oscar. I'd be perfectly happy. All right. So, Cassie, you mentioned Spencer. When we recorded last week, we were kind of all just like really sitting on the edge of our seat to figure out what the deal with Spencer was. And they showed it in New York and LA, and basically at the same time as Venice, they showed it in Telluride the day after. So, Cassie, you got to see it first. I think out of everybody, was all that Kristen Stewart hype worth it?
I think it's one of those films that is like both made and broken by its hype, which is to say Kristen Stewart is, to me, kind of the anti-actress, and that you love her, you hate her. What she does in a film, you know, she always brings very much her energy to characters. And I think that's what I love about her best work, is that she's very present in it. And again, with Spencer, you know, it's not surprising that Pablo Larraín takes a very kind of eccentric approach to this subject. That is, you know, that's his MO. But Kristen Stewart carries it. She's very committed to this part, but not in a kind of, I think not in the kind of pretentious way that we expect with big performances, big biopic performances. She's very much in it. And so even the ridiculousness of the film, which I personally enjoyed, you feel her commitment at every step to it. And so it doesn't feel meaningless. It doesn't feel silly. And I think, you know, the director has commented that Kristen Stewart carried him through this film, that he relied on her. And you can feel that she imbues the subject matter with something extra. Those scenes where she's talking to the ghost of Anne Boleyn. She's there, she's doing it, she's talking to a ghost, kind of bringing back her past with Olivier Assayas.
With Personal Shopper, yeah.
Yeah.
I assume she's not texting with Anne Boleyn like she was in Personal Shopper.
Not quite, no.
Rebecca, you're the one who made the comment, too, about Kristen Stewart carrying the film. Like, you caught up with Pablo Larraín after, like, a really whirlwind process there.
Yeah, I got to talk to him after a screening at Telluride. And, you know, he also told me he wasn't on the fence about it, but some of the financiers didn't want an American to play Diana, which, you know, there took a little convincing. But now after seeing it, I feel like I can't imagine anyone else doing that role. I mean, Kristen did a great job. I loved the film too. I loved that it was ridiculous. Like, we don't need another straight biopic on Diana. So like, this is what I was hoping for. And I think especially the scenes where it's her and the kids that play Harry and William were some of my favorite parts of it. So those are the less bonkers ones, but I thought she really showed off like a lot of depth in those scenes, especially.
Yeah, acting with kids is hard, and because those kids were amazing, but those scenes, I mean, they were entrancing.
I really like the way that the movie kind of leans into some of its like meta textuality, like you know, like you've both said, like you leave the movie and you're like, I don't think that anyone but Kristen Stewart could have done this. Kristen Stewart, the famous entity that she is, the sort of evolution of how she's famous. It doesn't map Diana Spencer's story exactly, or maybe even at all, but there is both this sense that like Kristen Stewart knows of what she speaks when she's playing someone who is seemingly living a fabulous life from the outside, but interiorly like really constricted and feeling a bit desperate. I think that both Kristen Stewart and Robert Pattinson, I think they've said in interviews that they don't begrudge the Twilight films. They didn't feel like they were stuck in this horrible contract or whatever. But still, the way that Kristen Stewart became famous then with, various romantic things that were splashed all over the tabloids and everything, there very much seems like she is working through, or in reflection, how she kind of moved past that and became this indie kind of explorer, in the arts, in the same way that Diana Spencer is contemplating leaving the royal family.
So Rebecca and David, you guys were there in Telluride to see kind of how the response was. And it did seem like everything I read from Telluride is that like Kristen Stewart, and sorry, Richard, you were also in Telluride. I don't mean to diminish your Telluride experience. But Kristen Stewart was just like one of the big focal points of the whole festival. Like everyone was so excited to see her and talk to her about Spencer, right?
Oh, yeah. She was, that movie had just premiered in Venice to pretty glowing reviews. And, I think it was kind of a perfect place for it to premiere. Richard mentioned in our kind of post-mortem that the screening we all attended together, it was the one premiere that none of us decided to miss. That screening felt a little bit less, let's say, uniformly enthusiastic. It seemed like I'd spoken to some people in the industry after the screening who were pretty repelled by it. And I think you got a different kind of sample size, right, of how the general public is going to react to this movie. And so in terms of like prognostication and things like that, I'm not sure quite how far the film itself can go, but everyone wanted to see Kristen Stewart. Everyone was talking about her performance in it. And I think rightly, she's on track for her first nomination for sure.
Yeah, I think that's the big question that I have about Spencer not having seen it and like having loved Jackie, the previous Pablo Larraín movie about a troubled famous woman, but knowing that it also wasn't for everybody. Like, I wonder, when you say she's on track for her first nomination, like, that happens all the time where we see people nominated for movies that people don't otherwise love. But is the Spencer backlash coming around the bend once more people get a look at it?
Yeah, I think it's the kind of movie that, like Jackie, would struggle on, something like a preferential ballot, say, just because it's not going to be a consensus pick by any means. But I think everyone on this podcast really liked the movie who's seen it. And so if Little Gold Men had its way,
you never know what our impact might be. So it could happen.
And I think if some people are really repelled by it, that's the movie doing part of its job,
Yeah, exactly.
It's framed that way, it is, and people should read Cassie's great review, which really goes into like the ridiculousness and how that needs to be there. It's really important to like how the story is told, but is putting itself so far out there that it's like, you can laugh at this if you want, like we're just going to do this and it's going to be what it is because this is how we're telling the story. It's not trying to be. I don't think it's really trying to like please people. It's just trying to, which makes it a really nice, like kind of and unique these days. Like it's just its own little contained piece of art that is just kind of bearing its throat for interpretation, I guess.
That's interestingly how I felt about Harriet too. It just came to mind, with the singing, and there's a lot of criticism around that. But I felt that, Kazi Lemon there and Pablo Larraín with this film, they both are doing something I think that is maybe more accepted in theater, which is really taking their subject and imagining it outside of the bounds of what we conceive of as reality and going to a kind of psychological, emotional place with it. And that's always going to be divisive. But I don't know, if you look back to the films from 10 years ago that you still remember and still like watching, it's usually the films that a lot of people didn't like.
Well, I feel like this is an interesting transition to the other actor who I feel like I heard the most about universally from Telluride, which is Will Smith and King Richard, which from everything I can tell is a much more traditional, much more crowd-pleasing movie, but that, it's a big studio movie. It's not the kind of thing that would usually go to Telluride, but as far as I can now tell, everyone loved it.
Yeah, I think because I went in thinking this is a standard studio movie, sports drama, like I know what I'm getting into, and it just like pleasantly surprised me. I thought the filmmaking was really great, even the music, everything just feels so thoughtful, and I just loved watching Will's performance, and the supporting actresses are all really, really great. It just I think because I went in with sort of lukewarm expectations, it just totally exceeded that, and that is definitely the film that everyone I asked what really impressed you? Like, this is the one that came up the most by far.
Yeah, I think it does a really good job of, if you don't care about tennis or you don't really know anything about Serena and Venus Williams or certainly their father, Richard Williams, like it makes you care, like because it stands on its own. It doesn't need the sort of its broader context to like exist. And I think a large part of that is that the director Reynaldo Marcus Green, like you said, Rebecca, he makes thoughtful films, even if they're things like Joe Bell, which was kind of roundly panned at last year's Toronto, but not by me. Like there's real intention there and care, and that's how you take a standard biopic and actually make it feel like an urgent movie. And then on top of that, you have Will Smith, and I think that it's such a full-bodied performance, and it's really great to see that kind of work done in a movie that can support it, because I feel like a lot of time come Oscar season, we see these big towering performances, but the movie that houses it doesn't really live up to that. But I think King Richard does.
Well, Richard, you're famous on this podcast for making bold predictions, and you've already made this prediction on VF.com, and I need you to make it here, and I'm going to pull it, Joanna, and write it down on a Post-it. Would you like to make a Best Actor Oscar prediction right now, Richard?
Yes, I'm staring at the CN Tower. I'm going to call it to the, that's the highest point I can see. Will Smith is going to win an Oscar for this. I don't see anyone beating him, at least from what I've seen this year. Obviously, there's stuff to come. But it's just it feels like the timing is right, the movie's right, the subject matter is right, the kind of performance it is. It's because it's not Will Smith when he just tries to be very serious, like in Concussion, or was that what that movie was called?
Tell the
right?
Truth. Yeah, Tell the Truth.
Yeah, or even some of his earlier dramatic work, like. It's playful, but also serious. He's playing a real life person, which again, we know the Academy likes. There's just all of the component parts, and then again, like I said, the rest of the movie is good too. He has wonderful support from Ingenue Ellis and the girls who play Venus and Serena and their sisters. John Bernthal's even really likable in it, which I didn't know that he could be likable. So there's just a lot of like apparatus around this great performance that I think will help buoy it into like the top of people's screener queues and then on their ballots.
I was just thinking about how, it hasn't been that long since Brad Pitt kind of had his whole, like, here is a major movie star, give him an Oscar for God's sake, like, campaign. And that can really work, especially when there's a movie to back it up that's that well-liked, which Once Upon a Time in Hollywood it was, and it seems like King Richard is. So I think if you're going to be confident about something, that's a good bet to make.
He weirdly did not come to Telluride to promote it, but he's like so charming when he's on a press tour. And so I feel like if we get to see a lot of Will Smith this season, that will only help his journey to the Oscar.
Yeah.
Life is full of things to manage. Your work, your family, your plans, and your treatment. Consider Kesimpta, ofatumumab 20 milligram injection. You can take it yourself from the comfort of home. If you're ready for something different, ask your healthcare provider about Kesimpta and check out the details at kesimpta.com. Brought to you by Novartis Pharmaceuticals Corporation.
I want to loop back to The Lost Daughter for a second, which, Cassie, you talked about. You reviewed Out of Venice and was at Telluride as well, and Maggie Gyllenhaal. I mean, when I say it feels like people were everywhere, my sense of Telluride from you guys is that you just bump into the same people over and over again. So there's like not a huge number of celebrities, but they're everywhere you turn. And she looked great in her mountain wear there with Peter Sarsgaard. She directed The Lost Daughter. She's got this great cast in there. I mean, David, you had talked to her previously about making her directorial debut, and it seemed to really just soar. Oh, God, that's cheesy to say about Telluride, but it really took off in Telluride. Like, people seem to really embrace it.
Yeah, so Netflix had 3 events for 3 different movies, which they were the only studio to do that. The first was for Paolo Sorrentino's The Hand of God, and that night was when reviews for Lost Daughter were breaking in Venice, and it was really all anyone at Netflix could talk about, at least in my conversations with them. It was really across-the-board raves, including Cassie's lovely review, and I think a real embrace of Maggie Gyllenhaal's vision for this film. It's very uncompromising. It's just not something you see from an actor's first film much at all. And just like a real confidence in terms of, this is the kind of movie I'm making. These are the kinds of characters that I want to really dig into, and I'm not going to apologize for that. And I think people really responded to that. And it continued to play well once it started screening at Telluride through the weekend. And Rebecca and I were talking about this, just how often you would hear her name in the context of, wow, like I just didn't expect that from Maggie Gyllenhaal's first film or something like that. She adapted the book I think she's a really good contender, particularly for screenplay. And I am curious to see how far the film can go across the board. Olivia Colman, it might be my favorite film performance of hers. It's just so tricky and deep and kind of plays off of her own very likable persona in playing a character who ultimately makes some tough decisions, both in flashbacks and in the present day. And Jessie Buckley plays her younger self. She and Coleman, if they are both nominated, would be the first pair to be nominated for playing the same role, which is interesting. And Dakota Johnson also is doing really great work in a different kind of role for her as a woman who Olivia Colman's character becomes kind of fascinated with. So yeah, just played really well. They were everywhere. Dakota Johnson was there. Peter and Maggie threw a dance party on the last big night of Telluride, which was attended by Kirsten Dunst and Benedict Cumberbatch and many, many others.
And David Canfield.
And I think Richard Lawson until the dancing started.
I left at the dancing because I don't like to dance, but also dancing at high altitude. I don't know. That seems like a bad idea.
I imagine Richard seeing Peter Sarsgaard dancing and just like disappearing back into the bushes like Homer Simpson.
That was essentially
it did start very abruptly, like because the film's set in Greece, and so you have this very like intense Greek music and dance that Maggie and Peter are doing alone, and then people are just kind of watching, waiting to see whether or not they should join.
And this dance party had been sort of threatened for 3 days previous.
Correct. Yes, Maggie herself had told me about it days earlier.
Yeah.
Did Maggie Gyllenhaal and Kirsten Dunst ever make a movie together in the aughts? Like I keep thinking they had, but I cannot come up with it.
Rebecca, didn't I ask you that?
You literally asked me that on the shuttle to the airport, and we sat there and looked out the window and tried to think of we couldn't think of one.
I guess they must not have, but they were just so in the same loops for so much.
They spent a lot of time together.
So Jane Campion, Kirsten Dunst, Benedict Cumberbatch, Cody Smith-McPhee. There was a big Power of the Dog presence in Telluride. It's a Western. It kind of makes sense there. And it did seem like it was being warmly embraced the way that we expected it to be, right?
Yeah, my bold prediction is that Jane Campion is coming out of this winning Best Director. I think that she has a very clear path.
That's I feel like that's a solid prediction. I mean, I think you've pointed this out that, Titan wins Palme d'Or. The last woman to win Palme d'Or was Jane Campion, who got a Best Director nomination for the Oscars but didn't win. And, coming off of a year where 2 women get nominated for Best Director at the Oscars for the first time, I do feel like there are so many female directors out there this year that's going to be like, come on, keep it going. Make women as part of the conversation as much as possible. Not to mention that Jane Campion is kind of a legend unto her own.
Yeah. And what the movie does so well is just like remind, because it's been 12 years since she made a film. She's done, TV obviously, but it just reminds you of like what a singular filmmaker she is, that her interests are so particular, and the way that she expresses those interests. And, here she's adapting from a novel that's, 60 years old, 55 years old. And you're just kind of, you after the movie, you're like, why did she pick that? It's so interesting. But then obviously it's so clear also in hindsight. Like, and I think that kind of signature work after such a storied career puts her in great and well-deserved position.
Yeah, I went to the tribute where they showed, clips of her work before she talked on stage at Telluride, and just like seeing the beautiful work she's done and then watching this film, I had that same experience as Richard, where you're just like, she deserves this. She's such a talented filmmaker. I did suffer a little bit from festival hype before I saw this film because everyone I know was like, this is the best film ever. And so I was like, no, it's good. I enjoyed it. But it's funny, this film stuck with me more than any other movie I saw there, and I was thinking about it and talking about it 3 days later, and it sort of like grew on me, and now I consider it a film I really liked. But I will say that festival hype is definitely still real.
Buyer beware. Yes. That tribute was interesting too, because it was moderated by Rebecca Keegan of The Hollywood Reporter, and Jane Campion was just not particularly interested in answering questions that night. And it was like, oh, this is how your campaign's kicking off.
I love it.
And she was just sort of hilariously charming in her refusal to participate. And then the next morning, the film had a big, well-attended brunch, and she was just so effortlessly going from table to table, talking to people. And I think you saw her ability to, in her very singular, personal way, work a room without being too focused on the campaigning part of it.
And then we have 2 Ridley Scott movies coming down the pike. Imagine the 2 of them working a room together, just like irascible veteran filmmakers.
Joel Cohen, too.
God, yeah. Joel Cohen is just going to pretend none of this is happening and not show up to any of your events, would be my guess.
Yeah.
It's interesting to think about Benedict Cumberbatch, who, we've talked about his role in this movie. It does seem like he is firmly in the best actor conversation as well. He's about as different a movie star as you can get from Will Smith. Like, their personas could not be more different. But it is interesting to consider the 2 of them together. Like, what kind of a treat to have 2 different performances to potentially dominate the season going forward.
And another thing about Jane Campion's genius is that she really figures out what to do with Benedict Cumberbatch in a way that I feel like most directors haven't. They're like, oh, he should play these arrogant, savants who solve crimes or invent computers or whatever. And he's fine in those roles. But Campion saw the sort of darkness in him and just dragged all of it out. And it's so effective, but also there's a hurt in there in this character. It's a really complex character. And it's the first Benedict Cumberbatch performance I've ever seen where I was like, oh, I finally fully get it. And I think a lot of that credit should go to Campion.
Yeah.
Well, I'm convinced.
Me too, Cassie.
Can't wait to see it.
The last thing I'd say about the movie is that, just in terms of its, I think, very fruitful award season that's coming is it builds. It kind of thrums with this tension that you can't really place and you don't really know where it's going, and she's shifting points of view a lot. And the last 30 minutes or so are incredibly intense, and the final few scenes are incredibly clarifying and make you want to, revisit it, I think, to Rebecca's point. And that's the kind of movie that does stay with a voter and that does stay with a viewer, and in a way that I think it only builds in estimation. At least it has for me. I've seen it twice now. It really sticks with you in a way that serves it well.
The last thing I was going to say is just in terms of other people to single out is that Cody Smith-McPhee and Kirsten Dunst both seem to have a good share of fans from this as well.
Definitely.
And we can get into some of the other titles that premiered at Venice. And ahead of the festival, Rebecca, you had done a piece on Cyrano without having seen it, talking to Joe Wright and kind of looking at Peter Dinklage's central performance. And there was a tribute to Peter Dinklage ahead of the screening. So, if they're trying to prime somebody up for an award season narrative, it seems like Peter Dinklage is right there, right?
Yes, I think his performance is really strong in the movie. It's definitely getting mixed sort of feedback from people I talked to on the ground in Telluride. It's a musical and it's really about love. There's not, as Joe Wright, I think it said in my interview, there's not a cynical bone in the body of this film. And, some people are turned off by that. But some of the songs work so well that they really stick with you days after. But through it all, like Peter Dinklage's performance is really wonderful. And, it's adapted from a play that his wife wrote for him to play that lead. So he really, just delivers a really memorable performance. So I think plus the tribute, plus he's, beloved by the acting community already. It just feels like he's got a lot of those boxes checked that you do to become an Oscar nominee. So I could definitely see him coming. I will say I loved Calvin Harrison Jr. in this film. He can sing like an angel, which I did not know until I saw this. He had a great performance in Waves, but I do think even if this isn't the one, we'll be seeing him, in bigger films and as a lead. Hopefully another musical, because he can really sing down the line.
We need more musicals in the world.
We really do.
I feel like Calvin, he comes from like a famous jazz family.
Yes, I learned that at an event.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's got that background.
Well, he uses it well in the film. He's and I think in Dinklage is not known to really be a singer, in any sort of formal way. But the music for Cyrano was written by the two of the brothers who help make up the band The National. And Dinklage's singing voice sounds so much like the lead singer of The National. Like it's this really low kind of, I don't know how to describe it, like plaintive, but kind of confident. It's a really interesting tone. And so he's not like, some beautiful musical theater singer, but like he sells it in the movie. And I think that kind of degree of difficulty stuff, earns him extra points.
It never occurred to me that Peter Dinklage of The National would be a fit for that reason. But the minute you said that, I can absolutely hear what Peter Dinklage singing would sound like. Yeah. And I want to see it for myself.
Glenn Hansard also pops up in one scene singing a very beautiful song about war.
Oh, yeah. I'd be happy to see him. And then, okay, 2 more Telluride titles that we want to check off the list. I guess they're both in black and white. Belfast and Come On, Come On. Am I remembering this correctly?
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
wow.
they are.
Which is the black and white film to beat in, I don't know, audience affection or anything else?
Belfast in terms of audience affection, I think. If not, I mean, I think Come On has gotten much better reviews. I liked that movie more than Belfast, personally, but I think Belfast has this sort of, well, I'll let Rebecca spoke with Ken about it so she can.
Yeah, I mean, Belfast, it also felt like it played more at the festival than any other film because there was always a screening, so someone was always talking about it. But, I saw it ahead of time so I could do a preview piece with Kenneth Branagh, and it's, it's a very personal story to him, and it's his Roma. I think I said this before on this podcast, but to me, you could actually feel how personal that story was to him, and I really appreciated it, and because it's about his life as a child in Belfast when suddenly his childhood was sort of turned upside down by this violence and danger, and I feel like you can kind of relate to that now because as parents you have to sort of decide what's safe and what's not during this pandemic with your kids, and then there's a lot of movie watching in the film, and I feel like being a Telluride, you sort of remembered that you missed movie watching as an escape in a theater, and so it just somehow becomes a super timely movie, even though it's from Kenneth Branagh's childhood.
Makes me wonder about movies with movie watching in them and what their Oscar track record is, because there's movie watching in Roma, there's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, there's got to be a strong
It's also
there.
weirdly identical in that respect to Hand of God, because that is also a movie made from his childhood, which through the various things that happened in his childhood charts his journey to becoming a filmmaker. So it's there's a lot of parallels there, and I believe that one also he spoke a lot about just the resonance of the pandemic in terms of encouraging him to want to make this film. So that's
I wanted to ask about Hand of God because David, you mentioned that was one of the big 3 Netflix titles they had, and it was at Venice before too. And Cassie, you saw that one as part of Venice. Like, does it if that's Netflix's Roma and Belfast is what Focus Features is Roma? Which one is the real Roma of the season? Were you a fan, Cassie?
I gotta say, I was not a fan. It's one of those films that you're glad you're watching it in a theater because there's a lot that is arresting about it, and the imagery is beautiful, and at times the pacing is really lovely. There are things that Sorrentino does very well. I think he does them best in television because he has a space in television to be bombastic in the most over-the-top way and sell it to an audience who needs their attention kept. In a film, in a theater, or even if you're just streaming this film, I have a sense that he's doing too much, and it becomes hectic and not in an interesting way. It just becomes running through ideas and themes, and he really is trying to give you the pathos of his childhood. Like, you're not going to believe how emotional this all was. It's like, I believe you. So it's one of those films where you're just like, okay, I get it. And, you're still like waiting for the last hour to drop of the film. I wish I liked it more.
The film does look amazing. I mean, he is an aesthetic person, an aesthetic filmmaker. But credit should also go, the cinematographer, who I don't have her name in front of me, but I met her at a dinner for the film, and she's this little Italian woman with spiky dyed blonde hair, and I was embarrassingly trying to talk to her about Italian film and television and that I don't know enough about. And I mentioned one Italian show, Gomorrah, that, plays, I think, on HBO here, or at least on HBO Max or something. And she really took me to task for even mentioning a show that she apparently hates. So anyway, I saw her at a couple other events, and she was fabulous. So I want to see more from her.
She was around. She was, she was lovely.
I'd love just trying to mention the one thing you've ever seen in a foreign language, you chose wrong. So sorry.
And then I had to tell the interpreter, can you apologize to her for me? and then the interpreter said, explained in Italian, and she turned to me and she was like, forget about it. Or something like that. Take it easy or something. It was great.
This is why we travel and go to film festivals. It's an experience you can't get anywhere else.
In a year that transformed the way we work, learn, live, and travel, perhaps no other industry saw the need to improve their virtual systems more than healthcare. Wired Brand Lab recently sat down with Brett Connor, the Chief Customer Officer at Athena Health, to discuss how digital technologies are being adopted for a more seamless care experience.
we've made incredible advances when it comes to virtual care, but we're still in the very early days. There are still a lot of interactions that happen in healthcare that are not connected. One of the things that athenahealth is trying to do is make sure that we connect those data points over those different modalities of care across that continuum of care and bring it together through interoperability, through data standards, so that a primary care provider has all the information they need to make the right decisions.
To learn more about how Athena Health is innovating around virtual care, watch the full episode at wired.com/video.
Okay, I pivoted away from Come On, Come On, but I did want to talk about it. The trailer for it came out from May 24 today, and I feel like I saw it with just like crying emojis next to it a ton. And it seems like we're having like a parenthood theme this fall, even though Come On, Come On is about an uncle. Richard, I think you were saying like how maybe relieved you might be to see Joaquin Phoenix out of Joker mode in his first post-Joker movie. Did it live up to that for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was funny to be at Telluride and see Benedict Cumberbatch and be like, oh, I think I get it. And then with Joaquin Phoenix and Come On, Come On, who I've gotten it with him before, but like most of his work I just find too mannered and too, I don't know, alienating or something. But this is the softer side of Phoenix in a good way. And, after seeing The Lost Daughter and other films where children were in peril, it was nice to see a movie about like the relationships between children and adults that was, more loving and sort of like sweet, but not in a cloying way. Yeah, I cried a lot. I think it's got a lot of powerful things to say in a quiet way about not just, raising children, but also just like being alive in the world and to be, to think and to feel and how you kind of compromise all the just sort of jumble of not only your own life, but what's happening in the world outside. There's just a lot going on in it that I didn't expect, and I think that in the past, Mike Mills, who made, Beginners and 20th Century Women, movies I appreciate, certainly, but I feel like he's kind of forcing the profundity in those films, and in this, it just kind of arrives naturally in really delicate ways that, had me weeping in a park in Colorado.
Yes, it also made me weep. I don't know if at the same points, but it's, you can feel a particular kind of personal touch with this. He always imbues his movies with very particular personal reference points, Beginners being about his father, 20th Century Women about his mother. This one was about his child. I got to interview him and Gabby Hoffman, who steals pretty much every scene she's in as the mother of the child in the film. And he said that he wrote the whole movie with his son right next to him. And it's, a lot of the very specific kinds of behaviors and quotes that you get in this film that make the movie in a lot of ways are just things that he was observing as he was writing. And I think that quality really shines through.
Now I'm on IMDb to see if Gabby Hoffman and Kirsten Dunst ever made a movie together, because that also
they
feels like
it's.
I know, it's like all of the 90s child actors and 2000s ingenues are coming back. I love it. Well, we should pivot to Toronto because that is coming up, and there will be a lot of titles that we've already talked about here or have premiered elsewhere that will be there. Dune is going to be playing at Toronto. We didn't really talk about it, but you can read Richard's review. We'll have plenty of time to talk about Dune in the future, I think. Belfast will be there. Spencer, Power the Dog, the documentary The Rescue about the Thai cave rescue. Did any of you guys see that one? I feel like that one was getting good Telluride buzz.
I'm seeing it here, but Vanity Fair did co-host a party with National Geographic, which had 4 films at the fest at Telluride, and people are abuzz about that one. It's about the rescue of the kids, the Thai kids caught in the cave, and with some like reenactments of the dives that these British divers had to do. So I'm excited to see it here.
Yeah, it's from the directors of Free Solo, who kind of made their way around a outdoor adventure movie. And then last night, Soho will be there. As we talked about, it was at Venice, but none of us have had a chance to see it. And there's not too much out there about it, but I'm intrigued by it. And then there's some big deal debuts that, given the state of the Toronto digital access, most of us will not get to see unless you're in Canada like Richard. So, Richard, what are you going to get to see that the rest of us don't?
Well, I will see Last Night in Soho. I will catch up with Belfast, which both of those are not going to be available to screen on the digital platform. But some other movies will that I'm looking forward to. Stephen Karam, the playwright, did an adaptation that he directed of his play The Humans, which was a big off-Broadway hit that then transferred to Broadway and is now a film with Richard Jenkins and Jane Howdyshell, who won a Tony for her role in the play. Beanie Feldstein is in it, Stephen Yun. And I think it has a lot of promise. It's probably going to be a small movie. The play is very interior and very dark and almost kind of a horror play. So I'm curious to see how that translates to film. And then speaking of theater to film, there's Dear Evan Hansen, which is opening the festival. So I'll see that, while we're recording on a Wednesday, I'll see it tomorrow. And, there's a movie that Martin McDonagh's brother made with Jessica Chastain and Ralph Fiennes called The Forgiven that sounds pretty intriguing and is also intriguing for the Chastain of it all, who after, a viral moment on the Venice carpet when she was there for Scenes from a Marriage, has this movie premiering, and then obviously the big Eyes of Tammy Faye film where she plays Tammy Faye Baker that's also world premiering here in Toronto. So could be a big week for her in the way that it was a big week for Oscar Isaac last week.
Are you going to get to see the Steven Soderbergh secret movie, or is it premiering after you leave?
I didn't know about that until just now.
Oh,
so,
they just announced.
Tell me about it.
Nobody knows. They announced it like last week. They're like, we have a top secret collaboration with Steven Soderbergh. We're not going to tell you what it is, and that's all we know.
Not even a title. Come on.
Does anyone have any I've seen speculation that it's like a documentary about his Oscars, which obviously I would watch. I don't know who else would, but anyone have any speculation about what it could be?
I hope it's a sequel to Let Them All Talk.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I hope it's shot on an iPhone, but
yeah. It's shot he gets to Toronto and shoots it on an iPhone and then just puts it up on the screen whenever he gets there.
What if he gets the cast of Degrassi together and did something with them, a very Toronto kind of thing? That would be thrilling.
Like those Jason Reitman live readings, but with Steven Soderbergh power.
Yeah, Spinner and Page, do a heist together or something. I don't know.
So anyone else have something they're keeping an eye on from Toronto? It is, again, it's a weird year. There was, last year for Toronto, digital access was pretty robust. I watched Nomadland in my basement. And for